welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today I'm going to be discussing a movie that you can't watch yet. You see, I was recently put in touch with director Josh Stifter, who had a movie that he has finished, and he is shopping around to festivals currently. He has made the official selection of Arrow Film Fest coming up later this month, as well as the Portland Horror Film Festival, Genre Blast, so on and so forth, and hats off to him for that, for his film Greywood's plot. But while this is being shopped around, he also wanted to know if any film critics would like to take a tackle at this and give their honest assessment of what they think. And so we kind of got in contact with each other, and that's exactly what is going to be shaking out right here. So in this movie, we get introduced to the character of Dom, played by writer-director Josh Stifter himself, as he is, well, a little bit down in the dumps, actually very down in the dumps. You see, he is a YouTuber without the commercial name to it, but it's essentially a YouTuber that runs a cryptozoology channel that is, well, I wouldn't say struggling, I would just say outright failing. Very few followers, subscribers, a lot of downvotes, a lot of nasty comments, and so on and so forth. But he clearly has this passion. He wants to put his everything into this, and when it's not being received well, it does affect him. Meanwhile, he's trying to keep the interest and the fire alive in his longtime friend and partner, Miles, played by 𝗘𝗾𝗵𝗺𝗀𝗀. And they get one last opportunity to really, hit a home run with this when they get presented with a odd video. Something is kind of off in these woods where this video was shot. That might be something that they suspect is some sort of chupacabra or some knockoff thereof. So Dom and Miles pack up their camping gear and they head off to Greywood's plot to investigate for themselves, where they meet up with the property owner, Doug Greywood. And that is as much as I will discuss on a plotline level, because I want to keep this fairly spoiler-free. So the question becomes, and I'm sure that Josh is wondering, did I like this movie? And I'm just going to go ahead and tear the Band-Aid off here. Not a whole lot. However, I didn't dislike it, and I really want to make sure that I'm coming across in a constructive criticism kind of way, because there were some really good elements of this that I did like. I remember I reviewed a movie not too awful long ago, within the last year, that I did not care for at all. In fact, it actually infuriated me, and I railed on it in a review. And I don't necessarily regret the angle of approach that I took to that, but I was affected when the director reached out to me and said, "You'll be happy to know that I'm no longer making movies." That's the last thing that I ever want to hear. And Josh, I want to encourage you that throughout all this critique and so forth, that the one thing that I really want you to take away from this is, please keep making movies. The whole issue that I really had, I was kind of struggling to think of how best to put this, and I think, as weird as it may be, I think I'm going to describe this as a pizza. You see, different films are kind of built in different ways on just a structural level, and in this case, this movie reminded me of a pizza. You see, we had toppings that I really enjoyed, the aesthetics of this and so forth. There were a lot of little tiny things about this that I really did love. So as far as the pepperoni and the sausage and the peppers and the onions and so forth, perfect. Loved it. Everything about it was great. However, the crust and the sauce didn't really work for me. And those were doing so much heavy lifting. Those were so foundational that the rest of the movie really did suffer as a result. And the structural element, that foundational element that this movie relied so heavily upon that didn't work for me, was the relationship between Dom and Miles. For all of the elements of this, with what Dom's going through in his personal life and so on, and the whole thing about the cryptozoology and the investigation that's taking place out in the woods, and then what winds up happening with Mr. Greywood and so on, I really think that all of those were interesting elements, but foundationally, this movie was structured upon Dom and Miles' relationship as lifelong friends, and if that didn't work, nothing else in this movie would have. And for me, it's not that it was actively bad. There was nothing about this movie that I think was just terrible. But the relationship between the two leads just didn't work for me. It didn't feel believable. It didn't feel engaging. It didn't feel like I wanted to be their third friend that was kind of silently watching, my buddies riff on each other, things like that. And I think that that was kind of crucial and necessary for that to happen. And a lot of that just comes down to needing practice. Some of the dialogue, a lot of the dialogue, I'm just going to be honest, a lot of the dialogue did feel stilted. And I think that it was a combination of how it was written, how it was delivered, and how it was edited. It was just one of those things where, sometimes it just doesn't feel right in terms of what's just being said. The way that the dialogue is being presented when one character is trying to pass information on to the other and there's some assumptions going on, so on and so forth, it doesn't feel natural. It almost doesn't feel natural in two strangers talking to each other, but especially within the context of lifelong friends that have this level of communication and almost psychic attunement with one another. It doesn't feel believable in the words that are being said. And then you have the delivery. And again, this just comes down to practice, this time instead of as a writer, as an actor. If you're talking with your friend, and this happens a lot in smaller movies, especially for first-time filmmakers, first-time actors, so on and so forth, where you have the dialogue, you have remembered your lines, but instead of just having a natural, free-flow conversation with your lifelong buddy, you're trying to remember your lines, and you're also watching your friend as he's delivering his dialogue, and you aren't really thinking about how to just constantly interact with one another. You're thinking about, where does his dialogue end? Where is that punctuation mark so that I know when to begin my next line? It's just one of those things that takes practice to kind of overcome and make dialogue delivery feel natural. Make it so that you're not remembering lines, you're having a conversation. And then with the editing, again, this is just another practice situation because a lot of this movie, not all of it, I did notice that some of the editing was very adept here. But when we had shots that were just two characters talking to each other, which was a fair amount of this movie, a lot of it was kind of edited on the beat, which means that we kind of went from one person saying their line to a different angle of the other person saying their line, back to the other person saying their line, and just cuts between, as opposed to any kind of overlap, any kind of two shots, any kind of other shots that brought things together in a more cohesive fashion. So between all of those elements of the writing, the delivery, and the editing, I just didn't believe the relationship between the two. And that was such a heavy lift. It was the singular core foundational element of this movie. And with that peg leg kicked out from underneath it, I do think the rest of the movie kind of fell down a bit. I think this would be a good example of really diving into some films that rely heavily on characters that are best friends and going through a lot of what these guys are going through. Because in this movie, Miles is not on the same page as Dom here. He does not really believe in the whole cryptozoology thing anymore, or at the very least, if he did at one point, he kind of wants to just move on. He's ready to turn the page on the next chapter of his life. And I think that there are some examples of movies of two best friends that are on different pages, facing divergent paths in their lives that threaten the foundation of their friendship. And that, I think, is really kind of the meat of what this movie really should have been coming across with. Yes, you have the whole situation with Dom, and yes, you have the whole situation with Doug Greywood, but I really think that in my heart of hearts that having this relationship between Dom and Miles is the most interesting plot line element of this. And when you actually manage to sell the relationship between them and then you put that relationship in jeopardy, now you have engagement with the audience. And that is what it really comes down to, is engagement, especially in a movie that just puts so much focus and so much of a heavy lift on that relationship. As far as some of the things that I liked, I love the cinematography of this. I thought that there were some really beautiful shots. Some of the creepier aspects of some of the things that were happening in the woods were done well. However, there were mistakes made, and it's one of those things where if the entire film was wrapped up in all of these mistakes, it would almost become forgivable as just a laugh-em-up slap fest that you just kind of write off. But the fact that it was actually done fairly well, it did make those mistakes stand out just a little bit. Like this scene here.
You know, the one thing I'm worried about is this camera's limited capability to zoom.
I don't know what was masked over here, but having a character's hand or whatever disappear because of that masking element, is fairly inexcusable. That shot should have been cut. The mask should have been refined. Something should have been fixed. It's one of those things where I almost guarantee that, yes, as a filmmaker, you noticed that mistake and you were kind of hoping that the audience wouldn't. But the fact is, they're going to. And when the rest of the film looks really good, again, it makes that mistake stand out just a little bit more. So don't just sweep the mess under the carpet and pray that nobody notices the lump underneath. Do the due diligence, spend the extra time, make it work. The other element that I just kind of want to bring up is something that I see in short films a lot and in festival films a lot here too. And I honestly, I hate bringing this up because I really don't have a solution for it. But one of the things that I really loved about this movie is you had some banger covers of some great songs that really worked well to enhance the scene. Some House of the Rising Sun, some Home on the Range, done really well, some good creepy elements to it, I loved it. Really did a good job of enhancing the scene. Getting a distributor to buy the rights to those songs for mass distribution is going to be a big ask. I'm not going to say it's a mistake. I'm just going to say it's something to be careful about, something to watch over, because when distributors are hitting the festival circuit and they're writing down, what movie they can pick up, that's going to be something that is going to hold things back. They're going to see this as something that, hey, the audience received it well. It looks good. It's marketable, so on and so forth. But the music rights is going to be a big lift, and in place of that music, we could possibly replace it, but will that really work as well? Will the audience... It just turns into a bit of a headache. So I guess, in terms of future projects, which I really, again, hope there will be, careful about using covers of protected songs. It's just going to complicate things down the line. If you can get original songs written or produced or get the rights to some smaller stuff that still has the same impact in the scene, that would be the better way to go moving forward. So anyway, would I recommend Greywood's plot? Yeah, I would. I thought that this was a pretty decent entry for, a fledgling filmmaker that's just trying to get off the ground and is starting to hit the festival circuit pretty hard. I think it's a notable entry, but it's not without its flaws and it's not without its foundational problems. And I think that that's what I really wanted to bring up in a constructive way. So I hope that I've done that, and I hope that I've done this movie justice in my review. Thank you so much for watching this. I really do hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you continue on making movies, Josh. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.